Well, good morning again, and welcome to another session of the 17th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm Bob Hales. I'm your moderator. We have with us C.K. Rizzo, who's an assistant professor in human development and family studies at Colorado State University. She teaches in the undergraduate and graduate level courses that focus on human development as well as practical skills for professionals. She helped co-found the CSU Trauma and Resilience Assistance Assessment Center, which provides comprehensive trauma assistance and treatment to youth impacted by trauma across the state of Colorado. Hey, that's great. What a great idea. We also have Day Halsey, senior teaching faculty in human development and family studies. He teaches in the undergraduate online program with an emphasis on early childhood development and is the co-coordinator of the online program for the Human Development and Family Studies Department. He received the Teaching Effectiveness Fellow Award from the Institute for Learning and Teaching at Colorado State. Just this year? Is that true? Wow. Well, we are honored to have you, and let me turn it over to all of you.
Thanks so much, Bob, for such a thoughtful introduction. And Carolyn and Valerie, certainly happy to have you with us. I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can get going here. All right, Day, you have to let me know if you can see this and if it's big enough and all of that.
It currently says started screen sharing, but I am only seeing a black screen.
Oh, okay.
Always
odd.
G.
Let's see.
As CK is figuring this out, welcome to our session, which is entitled Finishing Strong: How to Keep Students Engaged All Semester Long. CK and I have been collaborating on this presentation this year, and we're really excited to bring this content and share it with you all. Now I can see it is, yep, it's getting better.
Okay, let me get to the right.
There you go. I think that's probably how you want it. And
yeah,
so
looks good.
Yeah. Okay, great. We have a quick session introduction, and then CK is going to share about onboarding meetings, and I'm going to share about scaffolded assignments, and we'll do some interactive stuff along the way and finish with some concluding thoughts.
All right, so Bob gave us a very thoughtful introduction here, but my name is C.K. Rizzo. I'm an assistant professor at CSU. I've been part of CSU since 2010 when I started as a graduate student, and I completed the marriage and family therapy degree that we have at CSU, and then continued on through the PhD in applied developmental sciences in our department. When I graduated, really didn't know what I was going to do. I had done quite a bit of teaching during my doctoral program and clinical work, and really wanted to pursue both of those, and was fortunate for an opportunity to emerge to teach actually as part of the online program. Even though I was living in Fort Collins at the time, I was fully in our online teaching in our online program. And then, as Bob mentioned, was able to work with a small group of colleagues to start a clinic on campus that serves primarily youth and child welfare that have been impacted by trauma. So I've been teaching in online asynchronous courses for just over 10 years. And then Day is my wonderful colleague. She's a senior teaching faculty. She has 17 years of experience teaching, and she has taught both in person and asynchronous online. And we're both fully remote. We were talking with Bob about that before this started. We're kind of the exception in our department that we're fully remote, fully online, asynchronous, but we really have a thriving undergrad and graduate level program in our department of online students. So anything you want to add, Day, about you?
Thank you. That's a great introduction.
All right, great. So when we were thinking about what is something that we've learned, along the way in our teaching that hopefully will be of value to others, the thing that I thought about is what I call my onboarding meetings. And I'll share what those are, how I came to those, what the impact has been. And so the tagline here, "Are you ready to start off on the right foot?" is the question that I ask my students kind of at the start of each semester. Are you ready to start off strong? Are you ready to start off on the right foot? If so, join me for my onboarding meeting. And so this, and again, I'll share kind of the nuts and bolts of the onboarding meeting, but essentially it's a meeting early on in the semester. And how I came to this is just early observations as I had, that I had as an online instructor. These are things that students taught me either overtly, shared these things overtly with me, or I came to learn in other ways. And one is that online course structures vary significantly between instructors and across departments. So even things like the organization of content on a Canvas or online portal, how textbooks are or aren't integrated, the role of things like a course homepage and online courses, how frequently instructors are doing course announcements and to what purpose, how and when to submit assignments, all of those things vary significantly between instructors and departments. And then another observation I had is just the uptick in the first, after those first initial weeks of the semester, once you're heading into weeks 3, 4, and 5, would see an uptick in student questions and problems. Things like, I can't find the textbook, which is, kind of a shocking email to get in week 4 or 5 of the semester, right before the first exam. And you start hearing from students that, oh, by the way, I haven't read anything yet, or I'm feeling stressed and can I have an extension? Or I forgot about X, Y, and Z, what can I do? And so through these observations, the conclusion I came to is, and maybe that some of you can relate to this, is that many students, maybe all, crave the autonomy and flexibility that online courses offered, but still really needed the scaffolding to be successful. And that the earlier I could do that, the better. So from that idea, or from those observations, I ended up developing what I call the onboarding meeting. And so purpose of this is to provide a real-time synchronous opportunity for both peer-to-peer and peer-to-instructor engagement. It gives me the opportunity to explain course assignments and policies and important things that students need to be doing now and during the first week or 2 of the semester. So I offer these onboarding meetings during the first week of each semester. I schedule the meetings live for about 1 hour. And over the years, I've definitely gotten more savvy with what works in terms of inviting students to attend. So I used to just post an announcement, on the first day of class. And that got a couple students, like your really high achiever students that read the announcements on the first day of class. But over the years, what I have done is pretty much all of these things. So I email my students the week before the semester starts, introducing myself, letting them know that the onboarding meeting's coming up and when it will be so they can put it on their calendar. We use Teams at CSU. I know other people use Zoom, but I create an event and then I invite them using all their CSU email, so that shows up on their calendar. Depending on the size of my class, sometimes I reach out via phone calls the week before the semester starts and just say, again, kind of reiterating what I put in the email. I'm Dr. Rizzo. I'm going to be your instructor. I'll be hosting an onboarding meeting. This is the date, that sort of thing. And then I do, of course, post it on the course homepage and announcements. And then I've also do have an onboarding meeting assignment that is due in the first week of class. And I'll share a little bit about that. But that creates that level of accountability that they either need to attend the onboarding meeting live, or they need to watch the recording and do a summary. And so that last point, I think, probably got the most uptick in attendance and engagement because they had to in some ways. But I think it also motivated students who were available to attend live to just go ahead and attend live instead of having to watch the recording. So over the years, those are kind of different ways I've invited students to attend. So you might be wondering what it would be covered in an onboarding meeting. And so when I think about this, if you've taught in person, or RI, resident instruction is what we call it, then you could really think about this as your first day of class. Or at least that's how I remember my first day of class in my undergrad, right? An opportunity to get to know the instructor, to see who else is in the class, to learn, kind of like a syllabus day, essentially. And back to those observations from a few slides ago, I think one thing I realized is that students, to give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe they were reading the syllabus, but if they're taking 4 and 5 online courses that are all structured differently or have different late policies or things like that, then I needed to find a way to kind of help this information stick. And so that's really what the goal of this meeting is to create connection and also help them to feel equipped and start off the course like really knowing what they're getting into. So I start with instructor introduction as well as student introduction, and I'll share a little bit about options I give students to introduce themselves. Then I typically go into kind of an overview of the course and the primary assignments, course policies and expectations. So this includes things like late policies, or if students have some sort of accommodation, what are the expectations around communication and things like that. Any unique aspects of the course that I want them to be aware of at the start, as well as their tasks for the first couple of weeks of the course. And so one thing that I didn't say earlier, but I'll just share now, is I teach courses all across our major, starting at 101 all the way up through our graduate level. But the course that really sparked my desire to create this onboarding meeting is our senior capstone course. And the first time I taught, so that's a course that every single student in our major takes in order to graduate. And the first time I taught that course, what I quickly realized is that students, of course, talk to their roommates, they talk to their friends. They had a lot of assumptions about the course. Some of them had a lot of worries about the course. Some people had misunderstandings about the course. And the amount of time that I spent that first semester, not only teaching the content, but also kind of dealing with some of those things, is really what got me thinking, like, how can I get ahead of this? And so that one in blue there in terms of unique aspects of the course is something that I end up spending a lot of time on, because several of the classes that I teach, like the capstone, are very skill-based. The capstone is a group project that stretches across the whole semester. So it's different really than any other class that they take. And so the onboarding meeting really gives me the opportunity for them to hear from me right at the start of class, like the most important things I want them to know about the semester ahead. And I've just found it to be a very helpful tool that, maybe they've heard things from their peers, or they've, thought things based on the syllabus or whatever, but it really allows me to be the voice of authority and say, hey, this is what this class is all about. This is what I expect. This is how you're going to be successful, that sort of thing. So that's really what this was born out of. And then over time, I've adapted it to every single one of the courses that I teach. Over here on the right, this screen share is just an example of a recent student introduction slide. I mentioned that in the prior slide, that I like to give students that are able to attend live the opportunity to introduce themselves. So for example, in this most recent course, ask them to just share their preferred name, their favorite class that they've taken at CSU, a HDFS related interest. So again, we're in human development and family studies. And so that's what HDFS is. And then something fun, right? Give us some sort of recommendation or a highlight or something like that I try to include. And that's just a nice time for me to feel like, oh, I'm getting to hear from students again in a synchronous live way, and they're also getting to connect with one another. In terms of lesson learned, again, something that I've come to really appreciate about onboarding meetings is it gives me the opportunity to share my expectations up front regarding their participation in the course. And then in terms of the onboarding meeting specifically, sometimes I get questions about like, what do you do in terms of grading? Is it for credit or extra credit? I've done this differently in different courses. I used to offer it only as extra credit. So I would host the meeting. If you could attend, you got extra credit, or if you watched the recording, you've got extra credit for doing that. I've since switched to requiring it. What I found is that and of course, correlation doesn't mean causation, but the students who attended the onboarding meeting tended to do better, especially in the first couple of weeks of the course. So one could argue that's because you have higher achieving, higher motivated students who are going to be more likely to attend an onboarding meeting and do well. But I just felt like I was missing some of those students that maybe I really needed to reach. And so now what I do is I do require that they either attend live or that they watch the meeting in full and that they write a brief reflection and affirm that they watch the full recording. Again, I do include a brief way for students to introduce themselves as part of the meeting. I build in multiple opportunities for breaks to take a sip of water and stop talking for a minute, and also give them the opportunity to either ask questions live or put it in the chat. If I have a TA in the course and they're available to attend, then I have them moderate the chat and answer questions. And yeah, definitely have a bottle of water handy. If you're used to teaching in asynchronous world, then you're probably used to hitting pause a lot as you record things. And so talking for an hour live might not be something you're used to. So those are some lessons that I've kind of learned along the way in terms of teaching or in terms of offering onboarding meetings. And then again, what I observed is that students who participated in the onboarding meeting early on were doing better, especially in unique components of the course. So I gave the example earlier about group work in our senior seminar course, which again, students came in with a lot of assumptions, concerns, etc. about. And I just found that the students who attended this onboarding meeting were better group members, especially in the first part of the semester as they were all kind of getting their footing. I've gotten a lot of feedback from students about the meetings reducing anxiety for them, as well as increasing their confidence in terms of being successful in the course. And for me, it's really one of the highlights of my semester. My kids were actually like sick the night I was supposed to do one of my onboarding meetings this semester, and I had to cancel it and just record it. And I was so bummed. That's like the first time I've had to do that, because it really is, as an online asynchronous, I don't get that many opportunities to connect in real time with my students. And so for me, it's just been a fun, enjoyable way to connect. Again, it creates a method of accountability different than just, hey, did you read the syllabus or not? And instead I'm saying, hey, did you spend this time either live or watching the recording, really learning about the course? And just as an aside, I've made some changes over time. So I started these somewhere, about 4 or 5 years ago. And I think the first semester I did it, I made it optional, extra credit, as I mentioned. And I think for the single class that I was doing this for, I think I offered like 3 or 4 options, that they could attend. This is back before I had kids and other things, back when I wasn't very wise about my time. But over time, I have transitioned to now it's required. I do record it. there's a graded reflection, and I just host one meeting per class. And so I try to make it in the evenings because I tend to have better luck with students attending. A lot of our students work full time or that sort of thing. So I offer it about 6 p.m. on a weekday. Again, as I said on the very first slide, I give a lot of reminders, heads up that the meeting is coming. But just for my own sanity, especially as I've moved to doing this in every class I teach, I just offer one option per course. They can either come live, hopefully, or watch it and reply. This is just a sampling of some student feedback. I've, asked students directly for feedback about the onboarding meeting, and then other times students provide feedback in our, course evaluations. And so this second one I'll point out because this is something I hadn't thought about. This is a student who has some accommodations, some disabilities, and they said one of the things that they really appreciated is that the meeting was recorded, that they could watch and rewatch as needed and go at their own pace. And so that was something I hadn't really thought of before, but that student remarked on. And then really some of the other ones just tack on to what I was really hoping for, right? Which is building a sense of connection and confidence in going into the semester. So I'll pause there, and I know I have a small group here, Anna and Carolyn, but if you have any questions about them, I would love to answer them.
Oh, good morning. Well, I'm an instructional designer, but this term I started, I took on a student to be their success coach.
Yeah.
So I'm new to kind of monitoring them without being their parent or their teacher. And, she canceled last Friday's meeting, and now with the weather here, trying to make sure she can still get to her classes and make our meeting this Friday. So I'm not trying to stress out about it, but it's good to look at the type of onboarding questions you had and, make sure she doesn't flunk out or get overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think, and I hopefully I said this in terms of things that are covered, but, and I do have a small Padlet. Since it's so small, I don't know that we need to do a Padlet necessarily, but I think the thing to think about, and this would be true as a coach as well, Anna, is what do instructors want students to know at the very start of the semester about the instructor themselves, the policy and expectations, what the course materials are and how to access them, and what the main assignments are. So as you're thinking, and I'm sure you've already thought of all of that, but like as you're thinking about those initial kind of coaching meetings with that student, especially if it's a student who's in multiple courses, I know even across our department with discussions, for example, some instructors do a Wednesday, Friday deadline. Some do a Thursday, Sunday. Some require peer posts. Some don't require peer posts. Some accept late. Some don't accept late, right? And that can be overwhelming and challenging for students to kind of manage. So even, helping that student create an onboarding cheat sheet for each, of their courses that they can reference on some of those things, just so they become easy wins, right? So that I know, okay, this course does allow late work, or this course doesn't, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, and
I think I saw something pop up in the chat
before, because they don't have kids yet, but they have work and they have to pay for college. So they have their own set of things outside of school that are pulling away from being able to, follow the calendar really well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is so true for so many of our students that are just juggling many responsibilities, and that only kind of compounds sometimes that, I'm confused about X, Y, and Z. Oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have my question is, well, okay, first I'm gonna like give you a little bit of like my experience and then ask like what your experience has been with it. So when I started teaching, I teach an in-person Psych 101 class. And I'm at a small community college in Arizona. When I first started, I got amazing feedback from my students, but our students are on average, I think like 34. And so it was just like a lecture. We had great open discussion. I don't do too many assignments because I don't think psychology needs to be super stressful. It needs to be like, very much reflective. And so it was great. My first 2 semesters were fantastic, but then I started getting like dual enrollment high school students and the really, really young students. And they're like, we don't understand what's going on here. All you're doing is talking. And they're actually, I got some horrible feedback because they were just like, you don't have any assignments and there's no due dates on anything. And like, it's just not what they're used to. And so, have you had to change any of the way that you do things based on the age of the students in your classes? And have you gotten some better results about certain things than others for those younger students? Because I cannot connect with them. I don't know what's going on.
No, such good points. And Day and I have had this similar conversation too. And the tipping transition point for me was when COVID hit. Because before that, I felt like the majority of my students were kind of like that first group you described. They were very self-motivated. Many of them were working full time. Like they were in there, they were doing what I required, didn't need a lot of help, didn't ask for a lot of help, didn't want things like this. Like I think if I had offered this at the start of my career, I would have very little participation. But then we started getting a lot more students who were used to in-person courses, who really didn't have a framework or know how to navigate online courses. So I do think that the onboarding meeting could give you the opportunity to share your vision, your perspective, your rationale for why the course is set up the way it is, what they can expect going in. Because if they're coming in as a dual enroll student, they probably have a very specific expectation as to what a class looks like. And in high school, that's assignments with very specific due dates and, all of these things. And so not that you need to like transform your classes to meet that, but I do think if you can make an opportunity so that they can hear from you, this is how the class is set up. This is why. These are some tools to put in your toolbox now. This is where you might struggle if you're used to X, Y, and Z. This is how I can help you, those sorts of things, so that you're kind of creating almost a roadmap for them at the start so that they know at the very beginning what to expect as they come in. That would be my thought as to how maybe those things could meld together.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'm like trying to gather all the information I can to figure out how to, kind of make both sides of the class happy, because I always usually have like, half the class that are super motivated on their own and they're like, yeah, cool, we love this. And then the other few, I'm like, okay, how do I get them pulled in?
Yeah.
So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I just realized that I had said earlier, like, oh, Carolyn and Anna are here, but then I didn't mean to leave off Valerie or Autumn. So certainly if you have any questions, please chime in. But otherwise, what I'll just say is these are the things that I would encourage you if you're thinking about adopting an onboarding meeting is, what are the things you really want students to know? Like when you get to week 7 and 8 and you're like, students are really struggling with X, Y, and Z. I wish I could have front loaded that, like those sorts of things. And then how do you currently share that information with students? And could an onboarding meeting help supplement that? So this whole list here are things I've always used to communicate with students, and I still use them. But I've just found onboarding meetings to be a way that really like helps these things kind of come to life, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that was all I had in terms of onboarding meetings. So thanks for the questions and participation, and I can hand it over to Day.
Thank you very much, CK. And I actually can add that this semester I added this approach to 2 of my 3 classes and had great success and wonderful feedback. And I will definitely be using this moving forward. I'm an adopter of CK's approach. So I'm going to describe 3 strategies that I use briefly now, and I put all 3 in the chat, and I'm going to ask you to heart your top 1 or 2, and we'll have time hopefully to cover 2 of them, and I'll share the slides for all 3. But so CK talked about launching us into this successful approach to how we engage our students at the very beginning of the semester. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that I use in the assignment process to maintain that level of student engagement and hopefully be successful across the whole semester. And so the 3 strategies that I have really invested a lot of time in are scaffolded term paper, which is taking that sort of bigger research paper and breaking it into shorter assignments that are structured for feedback across the semester. Then choose your own adventure projects, where there's a series of assignments that lead to sort of an open-ended project where students have a lot of choice. And so the learning objectives are universal, but what it looks like can look very different from student to student. And then the last was the introduction of a growth mindset approach to grading, where students have the opportunity to submit multiple iterations of assignment. And that allows for growth and improvement before I finalize the grades. And so I've utilized each of these, and I know we're a small group here, and I'll share the slides from all 3, but based on maybe the hearts in the chat, I'll figure out where to start and which ones to cover. So I see 1 heart for growth mindset grading. Anything else? All 3. Okay, why don't we, CK, we'll go and I'll try and move quickly so we can cover, and I think I will be able to. So we'll start with scaffolded term papers. And I have to say that this was really born out of my own frustration. I don't know about you, but when I was assigning papers, it was typically towards the end of the semester, students would turn them in. They would not always be well written, and I would invest all this time in giving feedback and realize that most often the students just wanted their final grade and they were moving on, and they weren't necessarily reading my feedback. There was really no opportunity for me to engage in any kind of feedback loop where I could feel like I was having an impact, and it was painful. I didn't enjoy any part of it. And so my motivation was really selfish. The quality was poor and the grading felt really miserable. And so I came up with sort of this idea of I'm going to create the scaffolded term paper. And instead of just 1 final paper, I'm going to chunk the paper into a few sections. And my first iteration, some students took the feedback and started to improve, but I would say those were like the high flyer students that were already probably writing a great paper, right? It wasn't that effective. So in my second iteration, I chunked that paper and I added detailed checklists so that each student, when they went to the first section of the paper, had a very clear outline of what was expected in that paper. And things started to improve, but I saw really inconsistent outcomes. So some students were taking the guidance and others were not. And so the third iteration is where I kind of found my way. And here I had a detailed checklist that went with each part of the paper. So it would be, the first body section, the second body section, and the third body section. It would have content guidance and then my APA formatting guidance. But at the bottom, in the second section of the paper, was a reflection question. What feedback did you receive about your writing in the first paper? And so I asked them to copy and paste. And then the second question was, how did you address this feedback in the current paper? And then in my grading rubric for that second paper, there was a line that they provided that feedback and that I saw evidence that they were actually implementing the feedback. And this is when I started to see students actually utilize my feedback to improve their writing. It became a much more pleasant process, and students I saw grades improve sometimes from 63 to 78%, 81 to 85. And I think felt like my feedback was having an impact. And I was holding students accountable if they weren't reading the feedback, because there was a place in the rubric for me to actually, not award points if they weren't providing that reflection. And so students shared that in the writing process that they found the feedback to be fantastic. It was quick, it was detailed, it was helpful. And in the actual feedback element, when students are reflecting on their writing, they're also connecting the dots where they're identifying, like I responded to previous feedback by, and then lay out the things that they're doing. So I'm seeing it in feedback at the end of the course, and I'm also seeing it in the feedback of these assignments, that students are really learning something about their writing, about their process, and how to improve it. And I think for me, what I would say the biggest tip for success is you kind of have to start with the end result of your paper and think about what are the manageable chunks that I can break this paper into, and make sure that for each of those chunks you have very specific directions, you have grading rubrics, and you really spend the time to have clear directions, that those checklists are not just addressing the content, but also any style and format recommendations. And then require the students to complete that reflection. In fact, I say to students, if you turn in your paper and the reflection isn't attached, it's an automatic 0 until I get to invest my time in the grading and giving the feedback if you are not going to follow the procedures. Now, I don't, keep the 0, but it's a placeholder and a reminder. It's a required part of the process. So I think the pros are, it helps students avoid procrastination. It supports writing development, which felt really good to me, because I think I was really frustrated by writing quality. And in this process, I'm really supporting students in their writing journey. It encourages students' accountability, so they have to own up to where they're making the changes and not. And I find that by the time I get to the final papers, that task is actually the easiest one. I say I've invested all this time in sections 1, 2, and 3. When you get to the final paper, they've added an introduction and a conclusion. And so I'm really just grading for the overall paper, and I use a detailed rubric and make very few editorial comments. Cons, it is very time intensive in the early sections, and you kind of front load the work, but I prefer that. I hate when you get to the end of a course and you're really slammed in grading. So it kind of is a win-win, and it is time intensive to set it up. So those are my tips for success. I think I'll go ahead and tell you the other 2 strategies, and we'll do questions at the end. And I think these are a little easier to capture. So for choose your own adventure projects, my motivation here was and I think, Anna, you talked about this. You have students coming from different backgrounds, different interests, different learning styles, different career paths. And sometimes the assignments just don't feel relevant to the diverse application of the students. And so I was trying to find a fun way to really engage students in learning that would feel meaningful and applicable to them. And so for this, what I decided to do was to utilize that understanding by design. I started with, what are my learning objectives? What is my goal for this project? And I came up with different options for how I could assess student learning. And basically, for me, the Choose Your Own Adventure projects have 2 phases, the research phase and the output phase. And the research phase is the more universal, standard kind of assignments that you would utilize in a class. I have students, complete an observation and an interview, and everybody has to summarize what their experiences were in that observation and an interview. Or they're all researching, let's say, a challenging behavior, and they're summarizing information about that. So in these Choose Your Own Adventure projects, everybody sort of has this universal research experience. At that point, they are also proposing what their output is going to be for their project. And so that gives a chance for feedback early on before they go into their project. And then the second phase is the output. And this is where students create projects. And I've had podcast episodes, videos, Canva, visual graphics, PowerPoint presentations, blogs. A student built a website. And so there's a lot of variability in what it looks like. And for both parts, very detailed rubrics are critical to student success. And so we can go on. What I hear from students is that the clear directions and communication are what really help students to be successful in this. They really like the feedback and responsiveness when they're asking questions. And I think this kind of reminds me, Anna, of what you're talking about, those students who are really uncomfortable with, wait, what, but how am I being graded? How am I being assessed? What do you want me to do? I think that they need a roadmap sometimes. And so the feedback cycle is how you kind of give them that reassurance. And rubrics are always helpful, like having that organization there so that they can see. I can share what it would look like. I don't have it on hand, so I'll have to work with Bob to share one with you after the fact. So I think for me, tips for success on this approach is you really have to start with your learning objectives and what are the universal things you want students to take away. So start with the ending, and that often really works best with applied projects. And then building in those opportunities for feedback early on, especially for those students who are uncomfortable with open-ended work, they need some sense of I'm on the right track. So that for me is often topic and output approval, where, I'm making sure students have chosen an appropriate topic, that they have appropriate references, and that they have a plan for where they're going. And then sometimes in that research phase, they can create fact sheets, outlines, or sometimes I'll create like a research document that has a series of questions on one side, and the students are just responding to those questions. So I'm really guiding their research. So it doesn't really matter what they're researching, but I'm looking for certain information and setting them up for success in their presentation. Always having those detailed rubrics, sometimes giving them examples can be helpful. And I think one of the biggest things is to really share, in that onboarding moment through connection, embrace the discomfort. Yes, sometimes more often than not, when you go out into the field in your job, you are going to be uncomfortable with something that you're asked to do because you're not quite sure and it's okay to kind of figure your way through it and really have fun with it. But I do think sharing that sentiment with students can help alleviate some of the stress they're feeling by normalizing it and saying, hey, we've all been there, not quite sure, this is different. It's not a straightforward, there's lots of choices here. And some students don't like having lots of choice. They just want to be told what to do. But we get out into the work world, and that's not how it always goes. I will share quickly, because I know we're running up against time, on the growth mindset grading, which I think this was really, again, about me thinking about real world application and the fact that it's not just like pass or fail in life, right? So much of what we do is iterative, and we are learning how to receive feedback and implement it in real time to improve what we're doing. And so I really wanted to invest in supporting my students in holding space for reflection and growth rather than trying to get the answer right. And often there's not one right answer, there's 10. So, if you're so focused on a single narrow approach to something, we miss out on lots of opportunity. And so for this, what I really recommend is having, again, I think what is important is that that work is scaffolded, it's chunked into reasonable steps, that you are always providing very detailed instructions and rubrics. And then the critical piece is develop a timeline for submission and resubmission. And so this means that there are boundaries for students. It's not, open-ended. It is that this is due on Sunday. If I graded it on Monday, you have 48 hours to resubmit. It's not, you have 10 days. So there are real clear boundaries. And I think what happens is when students embrace this, they really do have an opportunity to grow, to reflect, to think through challenge, meet expectations, and they often exceed them. It can be time intensive from a grading standpoint. It requires frequent and consistent feedback and communication on your end. And I think the most important thing is you have to have clear deadlines for accountability. And that can be difficult to manage. So I often say, you hold those grades. If everything's due on Sunday at midnight, if I release them at a certain time, that window is 48 hours from when I release the grades. It is not. So I keep very standard timelines so that I'm not having to structure a very staggered deadline. And I think, what did we finish with here? Just students really appreciate this. I think once they embrace the mindset, I had students with learning disabilities who said this really allowed them to work through their disability and find success in a way that isn't often mirrored in other classes. I think it also really just helps students identify with the fact that feedback doesn't have to be perceived negatively, that feedback can really be an opportunity for growth. And so I think that's a really powerful message to instill in our students. And so, yeah, introduce the concept with clarity, set very clear boundaries. When is it due? When is the resubmission due? And include those instructions and grading rubrics throughout. So I know I threw a lot at you all to try and cover them all. I'm curious to hear questions. And and I'm happy to kind of give an example of grading rubric, Valerie. Is that for the term paper or for other things?
Well, I guess for any of them, because when I hear like really detailed rubrics, it just piques my interest of what do
Right.
you mean
Yes.
detailed rubrics? It could be taken a couple different ways. And I
Right.
guess for me, it would be helpful to see like an example of what some of these projects look like. So, for example, I teach an online class. I'm a nursing instructor, so we have an RN to BSN program, and it's like their capstone course. So it's all online, but there is a clinical component. So I didn't develop the course, but I've kind of inherited it. And they do a semester long project, and every week builds towards like a cumulative educational teach. So they pick somebody in the community. One week is they have to do some research about appropriate questions. Then the next week they interview the person, and then the next week they interview the family. But like everything builds. So I really like the choose your own adventure project, but I was just curious to see like what kind of submissions you get and how you have a rubric for that.
Right. So I would say for those elements that are sort of universal, I break it down into the required steps. And then I like, I'm a developmentalist and I love qualitative, but I really like in rubrics to make it really clear. So if it's there might be a part of an interview, there would be like three structured steps. So my rubrics will say like included all three required elements. And that's how many points, two of three required elements, one of three required elements. And I'll like write out what those required elements are. And to me, then it's very objective for students to see, oh, I did this or I didn't do this. And I think when you go to these open-ended sort of broad ideas, when you can make it very concrete what you need within that open-ended structure, I think students can hold on to that, especially the students like Anna talked about who really want to be told what to do well. I think that when the rubric can sort of give them a very specific target for what information or how much information, what questions they're answering, I often include, again, for really creative projects, there's a stage of fact finding or research where I will include specific questions that they have to address in sort of a research outline or a fact sheet that they're sort of developing. And that way I'm guiding the research part that gets to be fun in the end. I hope that helps.
Yep, that does. Thank you.
And I'll find out from Bob how to share out afterwards. It later today or tomorrow, I can send you an email with other examples.
Yeah, that would be
I'll
great. Thank
take
you.
care of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're out of time. Sorry. This was really good. So I appreciate Dave and CJ taking time to do this for us. Really
Thank you
good
so much for
information.
having us. And thanks to our participants. For a small group, we were really engaged, which is great. Thanks for your questions.
I'm going to stop the recording.